And now is the moment for Dr. Michael Waltemathe, senior lecturer of the University of Bochum, with his The Promises of Space Exploration, Humanity's Religious, Ethical, and Philosophical Futures in Space.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me all right. Is the
I
sound
think
good?
so, yeah.
Excellent, great. Let me start and share my presentation. Just let me add, I just recently started a new position at the Technical University of Dortmund. That's why this is in the presentation, and I probably sent you an old bio, so sorry about that. Okay, so here's my screen. You should be able to see it. And without further ado, I'll go through the presentation. Okay, the promise of space exploration. I'm going to talk about religion in space, and then talk about life on and off Earth, and conclude. Should take me about 20 minutes, and I will put some ethical and philosophical considerations in there in the middle. So let me start with this. When in 1968, it was Christmas Day, the Apollo 8 spaceship flew through the orbit of the moon, the astronauts did something that would nowadays probably be unthinkable. They read from the Bible, the first book of the Bible, the Genesis narrative of the creation of the earth and the heavens. And when they finished reading from that book, they even went so far as blessing the population of Earth. So you could argue that these astronauts in some way took up an outside perspective toward creation. They looked at Earth from the outside, and they described it as being created by God. The consequence of that was that the next day, the president of the American Atheist Association, Madeleine Murray O'Hair, sued NASA for using American taxpayers' money for spending religious messages from outer space. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court. You can find it online, Google it. It's O'Hair versus Paine, Thomas Paine, not the Enlightenment Times philosopher, but the then administrator of NASA. So O'Hair versus Paine. It went all the way to the US Supreme Court, and there it got thrown out for lack of jurisdiction in lunar orbit, which is a fascinating thing when you think about it. In 1968, the US Supreme Court declared itself not to not have jurisdiction over lunar orbit. But nowadays we do have national laws that seem to govern, and Professor Shatsi Theodoridis alluded to that in the morning. National laws that govern space mining. So there could be an interesting religious precedence for that, and we might be coming back to that in about 10 years' time. But let me go on. So the first time humans looked at Earth from the outside in 1968, they did describe it in a religious way. And religion played more parts in the American space program. During the Apollo 11 lunar landing, and those of you who have seen that, I'm too young for that. But when you look at the protocols, there's this point right after astronauts landed on the surface of the moon where Buzz Aldrin asks for a moment of silence and reflection on the things that happened during that day. And then, keeping radio silence, they celebrated Holy Communion on the moon. So this is actually a part of the stuff that Aldrin took to the surface of the moon. This where he wrote a biblical quote to be able to celebrate Holy Communion. So they must have learned from Apollo 8 in not transmitting it over the radio, not getting sued again. But still, religious ritual, doing religious things, living their religion was very, very important for some of the astronauts at least. When we go to more recent times, in 2009, you can see the International Space Station tour celebrating Christmas in Earth orbit. And when you look at the top part of the picture, I don't know if you can see my cursor moving around, but just over the hatch, there's a crucifix. And to the right and to the left of the crucifix, there's some religious icons on the International Space Station. So in 2009, an official NASA image depicts Christmas on the International Space Station as a religious holiday. 6 years later, secularization has arrived in space too, and Christmas now only involves the symbol of the Christmas tree and some stockings for presents and the Santa Claus hat. So there is religion in the space program, and it is going through the same changes that religion is going through on the surface of Earth. Um, Other religions have been, or other people from other religions have been to outer space. This is Israeli astronaut Ilan Raman, who perished during the last Columbia mission when the orbiter burned up during re-entry. But before he went to space, he asked two rabbi um, to help him live Judaism in outer space. And they had to come up with all sorts of things to think about. They actually founded an institute for space Jewish law, space halacha, and they concerned themselves, for instance, with how do you celebrate the Sabbath, which is celebrated from sunset on Friday to the first stars appearing in the night sky on the Saturday. How do you celebrate that if the time between sunsets on the International Space Station or on the space shuttle coupled to the International Space Station is only 19 minutes? And the solution goes back to Jewish tradition and Jewish history, and basically is you adhere to the time frame of the Earth rotation because that's the way God created the Earth, and who are you to change that? So there's more to that. If you want to know more about that, ask me. I can point you to some text, but we don't have time to go into that in detail right now. For Islam, same thing happened when this Malaysian astronaut flew to the International Space Station. He too asked religious scholars to help him live Muslim tradition in outer space, and they actually wrote a little book. You can find that on the internet. It's a 70-page treatise and on how to perform Islamic ritual in outer space. This is a scene from a video DVD that they published afterwards, portraying him praying in outer space. So one of the questions they deal with is, in which direction do you pray when you're orbiting the Earth in a 90-minute rotational period? But the most fascinating thing for me is that in that booklet is rules for how to deal with deceased people. So Islam is the only religion that at least I know of, or that I have found during my research, that has rules for dealing with dead bodies in outer space, which is a really interesting, or which will be a more interesting problem in the future when humanity finally becomes a spacefaring civilization. But one other thing happened when humans went into outer space. It was not just that they took their religion to outer space, it was that they brought something religious back with them, or something that you can describe as religious. This picture was taken during the aforementioned Apollo 8 mission. That picture, and you can probably see that behind me. That picture is called Earthrise. It is a picture that an Apollo 8 astronaut took with his camera of the Earth rising above the lunar horizon. So for the first time, humans laid their eyes on the Earth from the outside, from even beyond the moon. And we had that picture before. There's actually a black and white copy of it taken by a robot probe, but this picture was meaningful because it was human eyes that saw this new perspective. It's called Earthrise, and philosopher Frank White wrote a book in the 1980s, finding a term for what this image, this view, this perspective did to the astronauts who experienced it. It's called the overview effect. It gives the astronaut who experiences that a completely different perspective on life. There's quotes like, "Up from up there, you see no borders," or all the little problems that we have on Earth seem so meaningless and pitiful. One astronaut even suggests grabbing politicians by the scruff of the neck, dragging them out there to show them that all their little political quarrels are basically meaningless in the whole universe. But what it does is it gives astronauts this perspective of being part of a greater humanity, on the one hand, being part of something really, really important, and on the other hand, being part of something that almost meaningless in the greater universe. So it gives you this hybris that we are just one humanity and we can solve all our problems, while at the same time telling you that there is more to the universe than just our little planet. If you look at the If you look at what William Shatner, the actor who played Captain Kirk, said when he returned from his space flight, that's actually a very, very good depiction of that. He's completely torn between looking at the blackness of space and asking himself, is that death? And then looking back at beautiful blue earth and thinking, oh, that's the cradle of life. So this dichotomy between terms from religious studies, Rudolf Otto's religious experience, the fascinosum, the fascinating thing, and the tremendum, the scary thing, that makes this overview effect so powerful. But on Earth, back on Earth, not for the astronauts, but for the people who did not go, the overview effect changed a lot too. After this new perspective had been seen in newspapers, on television, in images, the ecological movement got a new drive. And things like how do we live on this fragile little planet became more urgent. So in the 1970s, just after this picture was taken, the ecological movement picked up. So the thing is, space exploration gives this change in perspective. And one example for that is a conceptual change in how you look at life on the planet. You could even argue once humans have taken up the outside, God's perspective maybe, they had a new appreciation for this planet, for this multitude of creatures. And I took a look at this multitude of creatures, that concepts of biodiversity. Right? Biodiversity describes the diversity in certain biological settings. But when you just try to find images for that, very interesting, look it up, go on the internet and try to find imagery depictions of what biodiversity means, you find things like this. It's all very cute, right? There's even an ice bear, a polar bear who looks relaxed. But that's not how biodiversity works in the real world. If you were in the room with this tiger, you wouldn't be chill. It wouldn't be cute. You would instantly recognize that there is not peace between the two of them. It's not, although we like to depict animals in this anthropomorphic way, this frog almost looks curious like a little human would. And we like to point out when we depict biodiversity that this is all about us being the same, us being connected. Reminds me of the biblical story of Isaiah, right? The peaceable kingdom where the children play with the predators, and there's the snake. No, that's not the snake. That's the tail of the lion who lives with the cattle, and there's the wolf and the sheep lying together. So our idea of biodiversity, when you look at cultural depictions, is a very benign, very positive, very reinforcing setting that basically is grounded in this idea that we all live on this one planet, this spaceship. If you look for ethical framings, you find things like this pyramid, which is depicted as wrong. Found it on the internet, and it says so in big red letters, so it must be right, right? The human male is at the top, the human female is one lower, and at the bottom there's bacteria and fungi and other lesser creatures. And this seems to be the ethically right connection. Everything has the same value. But of course, we do know that that is not true, right? We regularly eat these creatures, and we regularly kill these in the billions when we take antibiotics. So we do have this ethical framework that we do declare to be right, and the way we deal with it. It's basically the dichotomy between biocentrism and anthropocentrism, being focused on human well-being and putting everything else under the ethical value of human well-being, or acknowledging that all living beings have an inherent value and that humans are not superior. But does not the overview effect teach us something else? And it does. It gives an even stronger connection when you look at the planet, and that only this little blue sheen is what keeps us alive, the atmosphere. Then there's this notion that comes out of that maybe there's more to just biocentrism and anthropocentrism. Maybe we even need to take all the other non-living things into account, right? The value of ecosystems, living and non-living components. So we put the value of biodiversity above the value of individuals or even single species. different from what I showed you as wrong and right nowadays. And that is the consequence of having been to space and looking at it from the outside. But and that becomes even more immediate when you think of the problems that we face in the future. This image comes from NASA's website for mitigating the effects of climate change. That was actually a picture that was published under the Trump administration. So at least NASA acknowledged that there was climate change and that they needed to mitigate the effects. The way this is drawn, if you invert it or if you mirror it, it almost looks like a religious image from Western Catholic tradition depicting Judgment Day, right? The colors are the same. And on the right-hand side, the world is burning, and on the left-hand side, everything is hunky-dory, and people are sort of living in heaven. It's an interesting depiction that they choose to show the problems that we are facing by using the same color scheme that artists used in medieval times to depict the end of the world. But what if we really face the end of the world? What if space exploration is our only way out? And I've just shown you that space exploration has given us this perspective that everything is valuable on our planet. And that is depicted not only in flood mythology, and somebody in the morning alluded to that. We need to take samples of Earth life and preserve them if the big asteroid, for example. And there's concepts like that. O'Neill cylinders from the 1970s and 1980s basically look like somebody built a giant spaceship and put Northern California, the San Francisco Bay Area in there. That looks like Palo Alto in outer space, basically. There's more current concepts. This is a concept from Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin company, the same O'Neill cylinder, but this time it looks more like, let's say, Game of Thrones in outer space or something like that. But at least you can say there is inanimate and animate objects in there. There's even a big deer in the front. So we will take the whole biodiversity, ecodiversity of Earth and take it with us into outer space. Now, here's an interesting observation. That is not what we're currently doing. Currently, all we're doing is aimed at keeping humans alive. We build suits that match human physiology. We currently build suits that even allow for female astronauts to fly, which we did not do in the 1950s. But still, it's mostly centered on keeping humans alive. If we see depictions of what artists think we will do when we go to Mars, we will take those crops and those animals. There's, by the way, no animals in this greenhouse that will keep humans alive, that will feed humans, that will help humans survive. And a current example is the International Space Station. We built this space station to help humans do research there, live there, actually look down on our planet and see the biodiversity of our planet day to day. Since this module has been added to the International Space Station, humans spend a lot of time just lying in there, looking down at the planet, taking pictures, doing research by taking pictures, but still focusing on the biodiversity that we have on the planet, because biodiversity on the International Space Station is more or less a big problem for the astronauts. That is mold on one of the panels of the International Space Station, and we definitely do not want that. So human space exploration currently is about massively reducing biodiversity. Reducing it even so far that inadvertently we created new life, or we helped new life evolve. That is Tursiococcus phoenicis. It's a bacterium that evolved in clean rooms of the European Space Agency and NASA at roughly the same time, or at least it was found at roughly the same time. And it seems to be able to survive common clean room sterilization agents. So by trying to reduce biodiversity, we are even enhancing biodiversity. We even have rules for reducing biodiversity when we become the alien. If we go to Mars, for instance, or to other planets in the solar system, there's a rule that we have to limit to 1 in 10,000 the probability that viable Earth life will find a habitat on one of the other planets. And that is not meant to protect life on other planets, but it is meant to protect human science that we might want to do on maybe finding, while maybe looking for life on other planets. So even this is aimed at sort of the human advantage. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against space exploration. I'm all for space exploration. I'm just trying to ask the question, and I actually did that in a paper I authored with two colleagues from NASA in 2018. We asked the question, why 1 in 10,000? Why between lifetime death for an aircraft accident and yearly death from assault with a gun in the United States of America? Why have that risk for contaminating another planet? Why not the same risk as winning a 6-number lottery from a pool of 49 numbers, or the risk of being admitted to RuPaul's Drag Race in 2017? So why do humans choose to have that risk attached to the possibility of contaminating other planets with Earth life and not other risks? Our argument basically is that that was not an ethical decision, but a can-do, an engineering decision, because that was the way they could sterilize spacecraft. But we have made progress scientifically. We know more about life. We can do better sterilization. Maybe it's time to have this debate and do an ethical debate about how we would want to sterilize our spacecraft in the future. Or maybe we would want to think about not going ourselves, but taking one step back and saying, okay, humans are very complicated. We have to go through an awful lot of work to build spacecraft to human standards, keep them clean for humans to live in, reduce biodiversity so that humans don't get diseases and so on. Why not send other life? Why not say, if life is a property that we want to see spread through the solar system or through the universe, why not send hardy creatures, tardigrades, for instance, from Earth, and have them seed other planets, start their own evolutionary processes, and then maybe one day get back in touch with us? If we do that, we can only hope it won't happen this way, but in a more benign way. But that would certainly be something that we should be thinking. And now, let me close with this. This is actually a piece of art by the artist Giuseppe Pinoni. These are 2 rocks. One is a rock from a riverbed, and one is an exact copy of that rock made from plaster. They look exactly the same. One is the original, and one is an artificial rock, the artwork. And the thing is, do we really want to do what Pinoni does with his fascinating art pieces? Do we really want to do an exact copy of the Earth that you can easily distinguish from the original by taking a look at the chemical composition, but can't by taking a very close look at it with human eyes? And one other piece of art asks that same question. This is from Jorge Manes Rubio, an artist in resident at the European Space Agency Technology Center, sometime in the early 2000s. He suggests building a temple on the south pole of the moon, which helps humans not have to look at the Earth all the time, and thereby depriving them of the overview effect to find their own identity in outer space without having to look at biodiversity all the time. Because if we want to live on different planets, if we want to become a spacefaring humanity, if we want to become a solar system civilization, what we will experience out there is not a natural connection to the habitat. If you were to experience the moon in a natural way without a spacesuit, you would die. So what you need is a cultural artifact that helps you survive on the moon. But future generations in outer space will perceive that cultural artifact as a natural environment. So we are facing the dilemma that what we are building in space in the near future will be a natural environment for humans. So you could argue we have to be extremely careful what we focus on, because the culture we take into space right now will become nature for future humans. And nature is very, very hard to change, as we see on our planet. And with that, I close. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for listening. And also thank you so much for inviting me. It was a great pleasure to be here.